is David Futransky, Senior Director of the Institutional Advancement at Evanston Township High School, also a member of the ETHS class of 1969. Thank you for joining us for another edition of Coming Together, an opportunity to have ETHS alums have a conversation about some topic of interest. Tonight, we're going to talk with some journalists, but they're special journalists. They're all Pulitzer Prize winners. Our panel is moderated by Karen Jordan, who's ETHS class of 1990 and the ABC 7 weekend news anchor. And our three Pulitzer Prize winners are Rick Tulsky, class of 1968, Jeffrey Gettleman, class of 1989, and Megan Toohey, class of 1994. In the course of the conversation, they'll tell you a little bit about their experience with the prize, but they'll also tell you about being a journalist and what goes into the work they do and where we are going as a country regarding journalism and how we get our news. It's a fascinating show that we have ahead of us, and I'm just going to turn it over to Karen Jordan to take it away.
Hello, everyone tuning in. Great to have you with us today. My name is Karen Jordan, and I am ETHS class of 1990. Just wanted to say that I'm honored to take part in this ongoing series where this time around, we are looking at ETHS alumni who are doing great things in journalism, and we're going to explore the role of journalism in our society. Just briefly, I work at ABC 7 News. I've been there 18 years, ABC 7 here in Chicago as a weekend anchor, weekday reporter. Grew up in Evanston, and I'm actually back in the area, proud to live here as well. But enough about me. Let's bring in our panelists who are also esteemed ETHS alumni doing big things. Each panelist is a Pulitzer Prize winner. So we're going to get a great discussion. First, I would like to introduce Rick Tulsky, class of 1969. Winning his Pulitzer in the late 80s, around 1987, for investigative reporting with the Philadelphia Inquirer. We're going to find out a little bit more about what he was doing. Also, Jeff Gettleman, class of 1989, winning his Pulitzer in 2012, covering famine and peril in East Africa. Thank you for joining us as well. And also Megan Toohey, class of 1994, the most recent of the winners from a few years ago, 2018, for investigative reporting with the New York Times. Thank you, panelists, for joining us this evening. Actually, you know what? I would like to start with you, Rick. I'm not sure, since you have had such a long and storied career, I'm not sure that you're currently working. You're probably, enjoying things outside of work now, but I would like to get your opinion. How has the media changed over the last 5 to 10 years?
So 10 years ago, we were already seeing that the internet and consolidation of the media had greatly reduced the number of reporters, had decreased state house reporting and other basic vital reporting. That trend has just gotten worse and worse. And what you're seeing now is a growth around the country in nonprofit newsrooms like ProPublica, the Marshall Project. Each city has a series of such places where reporters who used to work at big places have formed to try to keep alive, in some cases, specialized reports, in some cases, just general newsrooms.
Interesting. And same question to you, Megan.
Yeah. Well, to echo some of that analysis, I'm a reporter who spent years working, up the road from Evanston in Milwaukee at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. I spent 4 years working there, and then 4 years working at the Chicago Tribune, and have been in New York for about the past 10 years. I was at Reuters News, and I came to the New York Times in 2016. And so I have not just watched from afar, but have been in these newsrooms that have seen such hard hits over the last 5 to 10 years. And it's really been heartbreaking to see the transformation. And these newsrooms are still doing as much as they can with dwindling resources, and I think are still doing very important work. But it's been really interesting to watch these news organizations that I came up in shrink substantially, and to also watch the New York Times, the organization of the New York Times, in the last 5 to 10 years grow and become, adapt in all these different ways in terms of online readership and doing different initiatives. I mean, I think anybody who's been a reader of the New York Times has been able to watch how it's really transformed, and there's so many different things to offer all different types of readers right now. And it's been interesting to watch that evolve. So the people, we're when we're back in the actual newsroom, you walk into the New York Times newsroom and you're rubbing shoulders, not just with other reporters, but also people who have been really focused on audience development. I mean, those people are just as important as the reporters, and you can really feel a lot of teamwork going on within the news organization like I've never seen before.
That's great to hear. I like that. Jeff, same question to you.
Well, first, can I say it's really nice to meet you guys. Megan and I work at the same place and we never met. So this is awesome that it's our high school that brought us together. And Rick, it's really cool to hear about your career and the good old days of like one of the greatest papers in the US. Social media has really changed our business. And I feel like it's democratized our business. When I was in Africa, so my career is, I spent most of it overseas. I was in East Africa for about 11 years. Now I'm in India. I work in a lot of really hard to reach places where there are not big media organizations. I think of Somalia, for instance, which is one of the most war-torn, sad countries on earth that hasn't had a government for 30 years, that has suffered famine after famine, that has suffered terrorism and government collapse. And in a place like that, there's no media, except there's social media. So I saw in my course in East Africa, the advent of this new form of getting information, where something would happen, a terrorist attack, or let's say even, a famine, a drought, some crisis in the country. And we would see information about it from the people living in the country, sort of citizen journalists producing information. Now, granted, that's not the exact same thing that we do as professionals, interpreting, communicating, researching, but it just opened up this whole stream of information sources that we never had before. And I felt it also made us more accountable. In my job, a New York Times foreign correspondent could blaze into a little town in Somalia and write whatever he wanted to write, 30 years ago, and the people would never see a word of it. That totally changed. We go into these places, the farthest flung places on earth. They have social media, they have an internet connection, they can see what we're writing. And so therefore we have one, we get feedback from the people we cover, and two, they can make sure what we're saying is true, is truthful, is accurate, is representative. We're accountable to the people we're writing about. And I think that's wonderful. I do agree though with what you guys have said, that like the little media is harder hit and the bigger media like the New York Times is getting more powerful. That's good for us who are still, at the New York Times. But I think the overall effect is people are still getting lots of information. It's just in different ways than it was when I started in the business.
And you know what, Jeff, you actually beat me to it. I was going to lead into social media, and just to really see what your thought was, if it's kind of a slippery slope, if it's kind of still this wild frontier of trying to really harness what's real and what's fake news, because that's what we hear all the time. Rick, any thoughts on that?
Well, so in Chicago, we have, as you probably know, a whole bunch of the nonprofit newsrooms from the BGA to the one I founded in Justice Watch. There's Block Club Chicago. There is the Chicago Reporter. There's the Southside Weekly. There's the Tribe, not to mention WBEZ. And all of them have developed strong communication with their communities and more discussions back and forth, both here are things you should be covering to here's what you've got wrong about what you're covering.
Interesting. Megan, your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. I think the question of social media and the role that it has played in the transformation of the media landscape in the last 5 to 10 years is a really interesting one and hugely important. I think that I have mixed feelings about it. I'll be honest. I mean, first of all, we have colleagues at the Times who now report on disinformation full time. It's become a beat unto itself. The way that people have been able to manipulate social media to push out literally fake news, and the way that ecosystem of fake news has spread is something that is actually people are sort of scrambling to document every single day, and it's had huge repercussions, right? It's had huge repercussions in our political races. It's had huge repercussions in the overall growing polarization of the country, which is, I think the political polarization of the country is also can be seen mirrored in some of in the media landscape, that you've just got, there was a time where you felt like most Americans at least were getting their news from the same sources, and that has changed drastically. It feels like the left and the right are consuming two completely separate, news systems and information systems, and then add on top of that the not the news organizations, but these individuals and groups that have sprung up to spread fake information, with social media being the main platform for doing that. And I think I think that I would suspect that everybody on this panel would agree that that's been hugely troubling. And I think even for reporters who are working in mainstream media, there's a real push and pull with the value of social media. There's no question that it has been served as platforms by which we're able to push out our work and generate more attention for the work that we do. But I think that you can also find that, at least for straightforward news reporters, we're not supposed to be, we came up with these really strict guidelines that you keep your opinions to yourself. And social media, I think, has made that a little bit more of a slippery slope. So how do you, as reporters who really want to maintain your integrity and independence, how do you engage in this platform without slipping down into opinion and in a way that can be detrimental and do damage to the integrity of our work?
Yeah, excellent point. And I'm not sure if as print writers, if there is a feeling that you need to sort of cash in on your reputation on social media to sort of generate your worth, I guess, in your newsroom. Yeah. Jeff, do you feel that way?
I think we're encouraged to get our work out as much as we can. And sometimes that's helpful if you have your own brand. And you have to be careful managing that brand, because, as Megan's saying, you could share some opinions or reveal too much about yourself, and then that can be used against you. So I play it really safe. Like I just sort of on Twitter, I just retweet stories that I've written. I share, some interesting videos or other media that I've come across. I really do not get up there and start, sharing my take on the world or certain issues I'm covering, because it almost, some of these, like Twitter can be a very hateful, form of social media where everybody's so quick to jump on you. And working in a place like India, it's incredibly polarized. There's people that ideologically do not like what we write and will attack us on every single thing that we publish. And so in that atmosphere, you have to be very defensive, and you cannot give anybody an opportunity to undermine all this hard work. We spend weeks interviewing people, putting together a story, doing a lot of research, taking risks with our lives, with the lives of our sources. You don't want to then slip up and make some little mistake or inappropriate comment that then undermines everything you've just done. So I don't know. It's a tricky atmosphere, but it also, just listening to our conversation, it makes me think that people are getting more news than they've ever gotten. Like if we think back to our childhood, right? You watch the evening news. The local news was at 5:30 or 6, right? And then the national news was a half an hour later. You got your paper, the Tribune or the New York Times, in the morning. What did you do the rest of the day, right? You weren't buffeted by all this information. Now, I mean, so many people are getting news feeds at some way or another, or checking the Times website or checking other websites several times a day. You're surrounded by it. And I wonder if that, what that does to us. I bet you it makes us better informed. But again, like what Megan is saying, people are getting different sets of facts. But I think the net is still that you're more aware of the wider world and what's happening in your community probably than you ever have been.
Excellent point. Megan, is there anything you wanted to add or any other thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think as I said, I think these are questions we're talking about in our own newsroom. I mean, these are things that it's been really interesting over the last decade to work within an industry that has changed so rapidly. And how do you try to use all of these different social media platforms and other ways of disseminating information in a way that is value added and doesn't, as I said before, like erode the integrity of the work that you're doing? How do you avoid, clickbait, right? I mean, how do you make sure that you are trying to match quality content with the most aggressive strategies for disseminating that quality content? And I think it's a real push and pull. And I think it's, I think we'd be lying if we didn't say we weren't grappling with it, behind the scenes in our own news organizations.
The other thing I'd add to that is one of the dangers is people go on Twitter or Facebook and read headlines, if you use the term loosely, and think they're informed and don't, there are people who rely on that as an alternative to actually listening to public radio or reading the newspapers or watching television news.
And I mean, to speak to the polarization, right? I mean, to speak to the fact that this country in, 2021 is consuming completely different set of facts, right? Does not have a shared, does not have faith in the same sources of news is, I mean, I don't think you could, the fact that you've got a large chunk of this country that believes that the most recent presidential election was stolen and has had, news organizations and, information systems that have, spit out information on different social media platforms to confirm that. I mean, to spread that was, is extremely troubling. Is extremely troubling.
Right. I mean, exactly. As far as, looking at the role of the press, in terms of January 6th, the role of the press before that event, leading up to it, and covering it as it was happening. Jeff, what are your thoughts on the role of the press in that?
My thoughts are, I've been outside of the US for 15 years, and it's pretty shocking what's happening. What have you guys done? Come on. You got to protect the democracy. It's really interesting to be outside the U.S. and see these huge events and these movements and these shifts from afar. I came to Kenya in 2006, and that was when George Bush was president, and I took so much heat personally for being an American and going to dinner parties and meeting people, and they're like, your president invaded Iraq and your president does all these bad things. And I had covered Iraq. I mean, I was in the middle of that, bloodbath, and it was a horrible experience for everybody. And then, we had the Obama administration, which was kind of restoring America's image as a place of opportunity and democracy and multiculturalism, and especially to be in Africa. When Obama was elected president, it was electric. I mean, people took so much pride in the fact that a man of African descent could rise to the highest office in the world. And when he came and visited Kenya, it was like the whole country, came to a standstill and was just in awe of this power. And then to have the Trump era, I was in Kenya, in Nairobi, watching that election. It was because we're, ahead. It was at like 5 or 6 a.m. And I woke up in the morning and checked the New York Times website and saw this headline that said, Trump is leading in battleground states. That was like the first thing I saw at like 5 a.m. And I was like, oh my God. And then I went to this event at the US Embassy in Nairobi, and people were just crying and mourning. And then to be an American overseas and watch your government take on these tendencies that you see in developing countries of this, dismissiveness of the media and undermining of institutions, and lots of behaviors that were more close that I'd observed in developing democracies, not in the United States. That was really, unsettling. And I think I've also had a vantage point of watching the US lose its moral authority. People do not look at America the same way they did when I first went overseas. They don't. After these, interventions by Bush in Iraq, which was based on misinformation at best, and the cost that made, and the creation of, Al-Qaeda and then ISIS. I mean, that was a disaster. And then what's happened in the US political system and what happened on January 6th, it has really undermined the image of the US. People used to love, I used to go overseas and people would say, we want to go to America. You guys are different, you're special. And you don't hear that anymore.
Rick, any thoughts on that?
No, Jeffrey's just depressed me completely. Thank you.
That's my job.
I mean, that kind of speaks to another point about the polarization. And I know we all touched on that, but, moving forward, is there a way to sort of bridge this gap, or is this now splintered? Is the media and news sources forever splintered with, some sources here, some sources there?
How do you get back to agreeing on a common set of facts? As Megan pointed out, who won the election? If the media can't agree on that fundamental of a fact, we're in trouble. Democracy works if people are informed and well informed. And all four of us are in the business. We've devoted our careers to that belief. And that basic belief is in trouble right now because somehow we've had leaders who have convinced a significant segment, leaders in the media and leaders in politics, who convince the media not to trust the press. And it's just bad for democracy.
You know what? So let's just take a moment to have each one of you talk about the work that you did leading up to winning the Pulitzer. And Rick, starting with you, can you share what you were covering and what it was like, kind of your thought process and when you were awarded?
So going back farther, as a young reporter, back when I had hair, I worked in Jackson, Mississippi for 3 years. And I had never been in the South before I got a job there. And it completely directed what I did, because I saw how much, if people aren't informed and if the justice system doesn't provide justice and doesn't protect the rights of minorities, then we're all in trouble. And so I have spent my career at one place or another. And since Philadelphia, I spent years at the LA Times and the San Jose Mercury News before coming back to Chicago. And at each of those places, I devoted myself to trying to do systemic studies of failures that impacted underprivileged and disadvantaged people. And in Philadelphia, I was part of a 3-person team. I got a law degree in Philadelphia because I went down that road. And 2 colleagues and I spent a year and a half showing how badly served Philadelphians were by their criminal justice system. And that's what we did.
Excellent, excellent. How did it change you afterwards, or did it, or as far as how you thought of the work that you did, and maybe how other people reacted to you?
Okay, so I'll tell a funny story that you can edit out. The 2 days after the Pulitzer ran, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the year I won, I was one of 3 Pulitzer Prizes won by the Inquirer that year, and the New York Times didn't win any, and the earth shook. And the prize came out in those days on Tuesday, and on Thursday morning, the New York Times had a story on their arts page that wasn't specifically about Pulitzers, but of course it was. And it was a thought piece about how when you win a major award, it can negatively impact your life. And it quoted a playwright saying, try writing your name in Pulitzer Prize winner and doing anything else afterwards. And of course, that wasn't about the Pulitzer, but it was. At the Inquirer, in those days, it was run by a genius editor named Gene Roberts. And Gene's whole thing was, we're not doing this to win Pulitzers, we're doing it to do good work. And winning it, I heard from high school classmates and relatives who I hadn't heard from in years, and it was great and wonderful. But it was a place that was motivated to do good work, not to win prizes. And I think that's a significant benefit to having been there then.
Wonderful. Jeff, same with you.
Wow.
Walk me through that experience.
The Pulitzer conversation. Well, first, it's really interesting, just our careers. And for anybody who's watching this, who's interested in journalism, there's a commonality between the 3 of us, which is we've all moved around a lot. Mm-hmm. That's what it used to be like. I think it's still like that to some extent, but when we entered the business, you would go from small paper to medium paper to bigger paper, and you paid your dues and you worked your way up, and you had to be incredibly mobile. Like you worked at the Jackson, what's the Clarion?
Clarion Ledger.
Yeah, and it's like that was like a crusading paper in the South, and it did even a great work recently where they solved some unsolved murders from the civil rights era. I mean, that would be a fascinating place to work as a young person. I started at St. Petersburg Times in a tiny little office, population 5,000, total redneck town with Confederate flags everywhere and people carrying guns. I mean, it was very different from Evanston, Illinois. And that was part of our growth. And to hear, Megan, about your career, you worked at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel and then in Reuters and the Chicago Tribune in that, those different publications, and then the New York Times. If you want to be a journalist, you have to be willing to do that. Like, you will close off opportunities if you're like, I only want to be in Washington, or I only want to be in LA, or I only want to be in New York. Like, we all wanted that, right? I remember thinking that. I wanted to go to Africa. Nobody was going to send me to Africa. Like, I had to work years, as learning the skills, but it was so good for me. And I'm sure you felt like the same way, guys. Like, you learned how to interview people. You learned how to develop your empathy. You learned how to write on deadline with a lot of pressure. You cover something, you have 2 hours or an hour to put together a story. I mean, Karen, you do it all the time. Like, TV's the fastest, and like those skills, like, build your confidence, help you relate more to people, help you learn about the world. And so by the time I went overseas, like I had done like everything, you know, and I had covered the Iraq War, I'd been in Afghanistan. So when I was in East Africa, I was just really interested in the place. And then all these huge stories like, you know, blew up on my watch. We had the pirates in Somalia. We had a famine in Somalia. We had civil war in Congo. We had Sudan cracking in half and the creation of South Sudan. I mean, these were like these big seismic events in that part of the world. The key is, how do you explain it to Americans who the last thing they're thinking about in the morning is South Sudan or the pirates of Somalia or whatever? And I invested really heavily in covering Somalia. I found it really interesting, really tragic, really important, and exciting. And I spent so much time going back and forth into that country for years before I won the Pulitzer. And I was in a good position because I became like the only guy crazy enough to keep going back into Somalia. And I was going to ask you, Rick, you know, did you work with Mark Bowden when he was at the?
I worked with Mark Bowden, Rod Nordland. We had quite a staff in those days.
So Mark Bowden wrote this series for the Philadelphia Inquirer called Black Hawk Down. And he reconstructed this seminal battle in 1993, and that turned into a movie and even became like a bigger sort of foreign policy milestone of like how the U.S. has to be very careful when it intervenes in these countries. So Karen, I covered, my work, and you can find all of our work for anybody who's interested. You can go to the Pulitzer website and you can pull up all of our stories. And it's really interesting to see what people won for. And I've done it for other writers, and because it's the best of our work, of journalism. It's like really well written, really important at its time. How did it change my life? I think what you said, Rick, it's true, man. I think it's hard. Like, yes, we're not doing this for the prizes, but it's hard to kind of get out from under that shadow. You're introduced as a Pulitzer winner. We're on this panel as Pulitzer winners. You kind of carry this baggage a little bit. And of course, I'm glad I won. But I sometimes tell people I'm the same guy as before I won. This committee just gave me a break and decided to give me the award that year. Like, I've been doing the same type of work before and after. But it does open up opportunities. I wrote a memoir called Love Africa, partly because I won a Pulitzer. I got an opportunity to do that. Megan, wrote a book. Rick, have you written a book?
That's what I'm doing right now.
See? So it does have some practical benefits, but you don't want to risk your life and bust your ass and put people out as journalists. We ask people to give us and trust us with so much of their vital information and really personal information and sometimes dangerous information. You can't use people like that for your own, self-aggrandizement. You can't. And so I think all of us look at it as we're fired up about the mission, and the people who win Pulitzers have worked really hard to do that. And I think that's why they win. And it's kind of like the cherry on top.
Megan?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to agree with this notion. I mean, in terms of working at smaller news organizations on my way up to the New York Times and really learning the trade, through actually on the ground, knocking on doors, turning around stories on deadline. I mean, when the Harvey Weinsteins, when I ended up participating in the Harvey Weinstein investigation in 2017, here was a predator. I mean, here was an alleged predator, a rumored predator, right? This really powerful Hollywood producer. And there had been rumors about him preying on actresses and other young women in the entertainment industry for years. And there had been other reporters who had tried and failed to get the story. And so I was actually on maternity leave in the spring of 2017 when I got a call from my colleague, Jodi Cantor, who had started, we worked together in the investigations unit at the New York Times. And she called me, and we didn't even know each other very well. But she was aware of the fact that I'd come into the New York Times just 7 months earlier, and did coverage of allegations of sexual misconduct against Donald Trump. And I had also, when I was at the Chicago Tribune, I had done stories I'd done a lot of coverage, sex crimes investigations about doctors who were sexually abusing patients, and the police and prosecutors and the medical regulators in the state weren't doing anything were basically looking the other way and allowing these predatory doctors to continue to practice. I'd written about rape kits. I was one of the first reporters who figured out that there were police departments, not just here in Illinois, but across the country, that were sitting on these valuable like rape kits, this significant DNA evidence from sex crimes. And I had spent a lot of time interviewing victims of sex crimes as part of that investigation. And these were investigative series that I did at the Chicago Tribune as I was learning the investigative journalism craft that had made a difference. They had put doctors in jail, they had changed state laws. And so back to the spring of 2017, I'm on maternity leave. And Jodi Kantor calls me and she says, I'm starting this investigation into this Hollywood producer. And I'm trying to figure out what to say when I get women on the phone, women that I think may have been victimized by him. You know, it's often like you've got 15 seconds. And I'm trying to figure out what is the case you make? I mean, you've done a lot of this work. What do you say when, oftentimes the assumption here is that you may be asking somebody to describe what may be or talk about or open up about something that may be the most painful experience in their life. There's so many reasons not to talk to a journalist, right? Like, especially when it comes to sexual assault and sexual harassment, there's a lot of shame and, embarrassment and a fear that if you speak out, you're going to be the one to suffer negative repercussions to your career, to your reputation. So she said, I'm trying to figure out like, what's the case I can make to women and why should they go on, why should not, like, forget even going on the record, why should they even talk to a journalist? And I said to her, this case that I had made in driving around the suburbs of Chicago, looking for women who had been victimized by particular doctors, people who had seen their rape kits shelved, and had suffered that injustice. Even the women who had gone on the, had worked with who went on the record against Donald Trump, then candidate Trump. I said to them, like, the case I always made was like, listen, we can't change what's happened to you in the past, but if you work with us, and, we publish the truth, we might be able to protect other people. And, we might be able to hold the powerful account, and we may be able to achieve delayed justice. I mean, we may in fact be able to pull off some delayed justice here. And listen, I've actually had some experience with this. I'm not just showing up on your doorstep with this, with this hollow claim. I mean, I actually have a track record of making a difference with these stories. And so anyway, it was, that this was the first conversation that Jodi and I had. And when I returned to the newsroom from maternity leave, several weeks later, I actually joined her on the Harvey Weinstein investigation. And 5 months later, in October of 2017, we broke that story. It was remarkable. I mean, I had been part of high impact stories before, stories that had changed laws, put bad guys in jail, but I had never been part of a story that helped sort of fuel and propel a social movement like the Me Too movement. And we watched with wonder as the dam broke, and women and men as well came forward with their own stories of harassment and abuse. And you could feel it almost immediately within those first couple of days of breaking the story. Our phones and our emails were being flooded with these people coming forward. And what was so cool was that to just see how it became like the coverage of sexual harassment and sexual assault became like a group project across journalism. There was almost every single department in the New York Times was ultimately involved in doing these stories because, of course, this problem stretches across all industries, sports, tech, the tech world, the restaurant industry. And it wasn't just the New York Times, right? It was all these other news organizations. And to see that spread out across the United States and ultimately around the world was just, the highlight of my career. And, Jodi and I did in fact write a book called She Said, where we take readers behind the scenes of our investigation and how we did this, how we broke this story, and what happened afterwards. But so, yeah, I have to be honest, when we were part of a team that won the Pulitzer Prize for public service, it really felt like, as somebody who had worked with so many victims on stories over the years, going back to Chicago, it really just felt like a victory for all those women who had been brave enough to go on the record, especially before it, that the kind of culture changed, right, in 2017 and beyond. But I just, having worked with so many women who went on the record and did that before, it just was like, to me, it was like to me, it felt like the Pulitzer Prize was for them, like this is for all of those brave sources who have shown that the truth can make a difference and drive social change.
Megan, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing those, that insight into your process. And clearly it's a passion. It's not just a career. It's a passion. Definitely. I think it has to be to do what you do and to do what we do. It certainly can take you to a lot of interesting and challenging places. I just have a few more questions, kind of bringing it back to ETHS. Just same question for all three of you. Was there a teacher or a class that you can think back to that actually influenced you to pursue a career in journalism? Jeff, starting with you.
Wow. I was hoping somebody else would get it. I don't think there was a teacher. It's funny. I didn't take a single journalism class. I might have taken high school journalism, but I didn't go to journalism graduate school. I did not take any journalism as an undergrad. I think that's also something for people to keep in mind if you want to be a journalist. There's so many different ways into our business. I often think the way journalism is taught is very dry and it can even turn people off. It's taught very formulaically. You have to do this, you have to do that, and learning the structure of news stories. I think it often saps some of the creativity of our work. I think what I took away from Evanston was the diversity. Like, we learned to deal with all types of people, and that was part of our daily lives. And we were meeting people from totally different backgrounds every day, and going through life with them. I played sports, I played soccer, I played lacrosse. I was really, involved in like being a wild kid. And that camaraderie that you develop with your teammates and people that you were really close with, and then you go off in your different directions, like that stays with you the rest of your life. But I think the experience of growing up in Evanston, and especially somebody recently told me that Evanston Township is the heart of the community. And I think that's like a really interesting idea, that like the high school is kind of like what brings the community together and what kind of puts its stamp on you as somebody from Evanston. It would be a totally different experience if you lived in Evanston and grew up there and did not go to ETHS. And I'm not just saying that because we're on this call, but I really believe that. And so I think, like, what is it about a big, diverse, cosmopolitan high school? What does that do to us? And to me, it made me able to relate to just about anybody. And as a journalist, like, that's what we do. We talk to people, we get them to open up, we get them to trust us, and we're interested in different lives. So I just really value that. And I don't know where else in the world I would have gotten that except at ETHS.
Yes, I've been preaching the gospel of ETHS ever since I graduated too. And so, I mean, my husband's from the East Coast and I dragged him here kicking and screaming, but he loves it now and he sees. So it's a great experience. Rick, same question to you. Was there a teacher, a class? Did you always have an interest in it? Did you kind of fall into the career?
So I'm the opposite of Jeff. When I was at ETHS, the Evanstonian was a weekly publication, and the teacher who was in charge of it was named John Requi, and you took honors, English honors HJ, J for journalism, and while Requi taught us Macbeth, he also taught us journalism. And you spent junior year as a reporter between, I like Jeff, I find the diversity of the place really valuable, but ETHS is a big place where people can get lost. And what working on the Evanstonian gave me was the chance to go out and actually see what was going on at the school and talk to lots of people and soak in the diversity that way. And by the end of my junior year, I went to a summer program at Northwestern in journalism and came back in the fall and was managing editor of the Evanstonian and lived in the Evanstonian office my senior year, and then went to journalism school. And it was what I was put on earth to do, I felt. And what's really weird is after I worked for many years on the East Coast and then the West Coast, I came back to Evanston to work at the journalism school at Northwestern, and then to set up this nonprofit newsroom. And I live in Evanston, and so does John Requi, and he and I have coffee to this day every so often. And it's just a special experience.
Great, thanks, Rick. Megan? Oh,
sorry about that. I would say that one of the things I'm going to actually kind of go with the approach of moving beyond even a specific teacher, just to the broader high school experience and the broader Evanston experience coming up in the public school system there. And I would say that one of the things that I got at Evanston that has really benefited me and I think helped fuel my journalism, and especially once I got into investigative journalism, was one, I feel like the growing up in the community and even in the high school, you're really taught to question authority, right? Like there's a lot of focus on social justice and questioning the sort of systems of power. And I think listen, I feel so incredibly lucky. Like that's what I get up every morning and do for a living now. As an investigative reporter, I'm always looking for ways to hold hold power to account. And so I remember, in high school being part of, I remember one day there was an incident where there was a teacher who had engaged in what was seen as like a racist incident, who had engaged in what was perceived to be racist behavior. And the students walked out. The students walked out of the high school in protest. And, I was part of that protest. And I think that this questioning of authority, this questioning of power structures, and this desire to hold power to account is something that, that I really carried with me into the profession of journalism. And beyond that, I also feel like, I'm going to be honest here, I felt like Evanston also made me tough. That, it wasn't always like completely harmonious, right? You have people from all these different backgrounds, and there was sometimes conflict. There was sometimes conflict in the halls of the high school. There was sometimes conflict outside the high school, and I feel like it sort of toughened me up, and to my benefit. So, in 2016, when I'm on the phone interviewing Donald Trump about allegations of sexual misconduct against him, and he's turning the tables and starting to scream at me and say that I'm a disgusting human being. There's that sort of like wild kid in me that's like, no. Like I'm not gonna be intimidated by you. I'm not gonna be bullied by you. And carried on the interview until it was complete and I got what I needed in order for us to publish that story. Same thing with Harvey Weinstein. I mean, he was, one of the biggest bullies in Hollywood. And when we were closing in on our story at the end, he was coming at us with, he was coming at us with legal threats. He was coming at us with, he marched into the New York Times newsroom uninvited, trying to intimidate us. And, when he did, I said, I'll take that meeting. I'm happy to take that meeting because I'm not afraid of bullies. And I know how to, I feel like there's a toughness that I carried with me from Evanston that I'm really proud of. And it's one of the things that I just love about the community. I mean, it's just such an honor to be here with everybody tonight. And any chance I can get to actually be physically back in the building and in the community, I seize, because it means so much to me and has been such a defining part of who I am.
Excellent. Oh, and ETHS does not play that at all.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
You have to represent for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, one last thing before we wrap this up. We're actually going to borrow from the David Faraday show, where I don't know if you've seen this show, but David Faraday, golfer, has his own show. At the end of it, he does this thing called Rapid Fire, where he just asks these random questions. Just, there's no right or wrong answer, but it's just for fun. So, okay. So I'm going to pose the one question, and then it's going to go Jeff, Rick, Megan, because that's just the order of my screen. You each get the turn of answering. So, and then that'll be the next question. So the first question is Beardsley, Bacon, Michael, or Boltwood?
Beardsley.
Rick?
North.
North.
It predate Beardsley, but it was Beardsley.
Megan?
I'm gonna have to go with Beardsley too.
No one said Michael. I was a Michael girl. Okay, I don't know what that meant, but yes. Okay. Jeff, orange or blue?
Orange.
Blue.
Megan?
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned it's my toddler daughter is turning 4 tomorrow, and she's consistently blue is her favorite color. So I'd be a bad mother if I didn't go with blue in this option.
Okay. It's a tie. I'm orange. I will say orange too. I don't know if the host is supposed to answer, but I'll just answer one.
Go for it.
Okay. Favorite place for lunch? Now, I don't know, Megan, I don't know if there was an open campus when you were there back in the day.
There was, yeah.
It was still open. Okay, you could leave the campus. All right.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, favorite place for lunch?
We would speed off to Pizza Hut, and we had like a half an hour for lunch. So we would get there and you had like no room for error. By the time you got there and you made your order and then you got the pizza, you had like 2 seconds to eat it and then you had to go back. And that was like really exciting to get these personal pan pizzas at Pizza Hut that were like the greasiest. Like Evanston has got so much good pizza, and that was not one of them.
Yeah.
High school. I like that. Rick?
We ate inside the Evanstonian office.
Oh, okay. Megan?
Well, if you had access to a car, it was Pita Inn in Skokie. Was my favorite. Amazing hummus and shish kebab sandwiches. And if you didn't have a car, if you didn't have access to a car, going across the street to G's for a bag of French fries, like smothered in ketchup, was like a fantastic second choice.
I wish I could say I had a fun choice, but I was kind of basic. I went to the McDonald's on the street with everybody else. And like Jeff was saying, since everybody went there, you only had 1 minute to get your food and to hurry back to school. So yes, the McDonald's, that's been there since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
Favorite place in Evanston to just hang out, Jeff, back in the day?
Wow. I'd have to say the lakefront by the observatory at Northwestern. There's that sort of long strip where the rocks are. I don't know, that to me, I've gone there sometimes like late at night, early in the morning, and you get a sense of peace. Yeah, that's by far my place.
Rick?
Lee Street Beach.
Very nice. Megan?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. Those are also 2 of my favorite places in Evanston. I think I would also say when I spent a lot of time hanging out at cafes when I was in high school. So the Unicorn Cafe, which I'm so sad. I think that some of these cafes have actually closed over the past year, but was, anyway, I feel like I did a proper amount of like teenage brooding at the various cafes, and Evanston, and was just so grateful that they were there. To welcome that, to welcome that brooding.
I love it. Yes, same here. I think it's the building is there, but it's not. It used to be called Cafe Express on Dempster.
Yes.
Yes, that was my wannabe beatnik, days going there right after school, but
Right.
to the
Cafe de Presse,
for
right?
sure.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Okay, well, I do want to thank you. This has been a really great hour. Thank you for sharing your time and the insight, and just discussing journalism, its past, present, and future. Really value that. And so, yes, I think this will be a great reference for alumni and just for anyone. Of course, this is going to be shown in classrooms as well. So Jeff, Rick, and Megan, thank you again for joining us this evening, and hope you all have a great night.
Wow. Again, we have a panel that just gets us thinking. Thank you so much to Karen Jordan, our moderator, and our three panelists, Jeffrey Gettleman, Megan Toohey, Rick Tulsky. I found this to be another very interesting conversation, and I'm looking forward to future conversations that will be of topics of interest. We are working on panels for April and May. We're not quite ready to announce them, but we will let you know as soon as we do have them lined up. We're open to ideas, so if you're looking to contribute or be part of a panel, please send an email to alumni@eths.k12.il.us. Also, we work very closely with the ETHS Foundation. They have had a successful event, Wild, for ETHS, which took place a couple of weeks ago. They are in the midst of picking their projects that they're going to support for the 2021-22 school year. So if you're interested in supporting ETHS, go to the Foundation's website, supporteths.org, and see what you can do for us. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next month.